What if the truth we've all accepted isn't the full story? What if, behind the silence, the cameras, and the headlines, there's a voice that was never allowed to speak? Before we dive into this, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any part of this unfolding story. Months ago, the nation was shaken by a tragedy that soon became one of the most widely discussed court cases in recent memory, the Tyler Robinson trial. But as the courtroom filled with arguments and the internet overflowed with opinions, one quiet question refused to fade. Why did Tyler Robinson's parents remain silent for so long? To many, their absence from the public eye looked like avoidance, an unwillingness to face scrutiny. Yet according to those familiar with the case, their silence was not a lack of care but a condition advised, even urged, by federal officials who feared for their safety. The family was reportedly told that any public statement could expose them to risk or unwanted attention. It was a warning that carried both authority and weight. Overnight, their voices disappeared, and with them, their ability to defend their son in the public arena. The courtroom became their only platform, but in the court of public opinion, silence quickly became synonymous with shame. Neighbors turned distant, cameras lingered outside their home, and online spaces filled with speculation. What began as a legal process soon became a public spectacle. Each gesture, each photograph, each moment of silence reinterpreted 100 different ways. For the Robinsons, silence was no longer just obedience to caution. It became a way to stay safe. As weeks turned into months, the story evolved into something larger than one case. Tyler Robinson's name appeared everywhere, on screens, in headlines, across talk shows and forums. Before the trial had even begun, a narrative had already taken root. To much of the public, Tyler was not simply accused, he was presumed guilty long before the verdict. His image became shorthand for outrage, and his story was condensed into a headline-friendly version that spread faster than facts could catch up. This premature judgment did more than define public opinion. It shaped how people treated his family. The Robinsons found themselves isolated, not for their actions, but for their connection to a person the nation had already decided was guilty. Their home, once a hub of laughter and family gatherings, became a refuge of quiet and drawn curtains. Friends kept their distance. Texts and calls dwindled. While the outside world debated theories, inside that small Utah home, time stood painfully still. Then came the unexpected. After months of near-total silence, Tyler's mother spoke. Not through an interview, not at a press conference, but through a handwritten letter. One that would reach far beyond her neighborhood or the courtroom. The letter began simply, "My son can never kill a human being." 6 words that reignited a national debate. Her letter wasn't an attack on the justice system, nor an attempt to deny anyone's pain. It was an appeal, a plea for understanding, for patience, and for fairness. She wrote not to challenge the trial, but to remind people of the human cost of public judgment. She spoke of sleepless nights spent watching her son's face on television, accompanied by headlines that stripped away his humanity. She described the pain of seeing him transformed from a person into a symbol of wrongdoing, defined entirely by what others assumed had happened. In her writing, she didn't dismiss the suffering of the victim's family. She didn't ask for sympathy. What she asked for was balance, the space to allow truth to unfold before conclusions were set in stone. She questioned the speed at which society had decided who her son was, how social media had become judge and jury, and how easily compassion seemed to vanish in the glare of headlines. She spoke about how media coverage can frame a story long before any trial begins. Each image, each carefully edited segment, each repeated phrase has the power to create a perception that's hard to reverse. She recounted opening her phone only to find strangers debating her family's morality, her parenting, even her grief. "He deserves to be heard before being condemned," she wrote, a single sentence that resonated deeply across the country. For the Robinsons, silence had been their only defense. But as the mother's words revealed, that silence came with an unbearable emotional price. Fear had shaped their every decision, the fear that anything they said could worsen their situation, the fear that their love for their son would be misinterpreted as denial. They lived behind closed doors, trying to protect what little peace remained. Even at home, safety felt fragile. The weight of constant media scrutiny was unrelenting. When the letter was finally released through their attorney, it didn't just mark the end of silence, it marked a shift in tone. It humanized a story that had long been reduced to black and white judgments. The mother's words didn't ask the public to ignore the tragedy. They asked them to look closer at the people living within it. For the first time in months, the conversation wasn't just about guilt or innocence, it was about empathy and fairness. Inside the courtroom, the proceedings continued as expected. The prosecution presented its evidence, a collection of DNA findings, phone messages, and security footage. They argued that these elements painted a consistent picture, one that pointed to deliberate intent. The evidence, they said, formed a chain of circumstances leading back to Tyler Robinson. The defense countered with an argument focused on process and interpretation. They questioned the methods used to collect and handle digital materials, noting that any error in preservation could affect conclusions. They also pointed out that data, while factual, can be misunderstood when taken out of context. DNA transfer, they reminded the court, can occur unintentionally, and proximity to a location does not automatically prove involvement. Their central point was simple. Every piece of evidence deserves scrutiny, and justice demands accuracy, not assumptions. Beyond the legal debate, the defense highlighted Tyler's psychological state at the time. They raised questions about his mental and emotional well-being, suggesting that understanding his behavior required context beyond the evidence. Their aim wasn't to excuse but to explain, to present the human side of a young man caught in an event that changed countless lives. As the trial continued, the mother's letter became more than a personal outcry. It became a national moment of reflection. It shifted the conversation from courtroom tactics to collective conscience. Her words reminded people that justice cannot thrive without compassion, and that listening is a crucial part of truth-seeking. Across the nation, reactions were mixed but intense. Some saw her letter as a powerful expression of maternal love, a mother doing what mothers do, protecting her child with words when she had no other way. Others believed the letter risked reopening painful wounds, especially for those still grieving. Both perspectives revealed the deep emotional divide this case had carved into public consciousness. Social media became the platform for this divide. Supporters praised her courage, arguing that no parent should be denied a voice. Critics, meanwhile, questioned whether her timing was fair. Talk shows debated the ethical boundaries of speaking publicly during an ongoing trial. Hashtags trended overnight, and within hours, millions were once again talking about the Robinson case, but this time, the tone was different. Legal analysts pointed out that while her letter might not alter the trial's outcome, it had already transformed its atmosphere in ways few expected. It didn't introduce new evidence or challenge the prosecution's case. Instead, it did something subtler and perhaps more profound. It changed the tone of the conversation. In a courtroom where tension had hardened into hostility, where every statement seemed designed to wound or defend, her words brought something rare: empathy. Her letter reintroduced a sense of humanity into a dialogue long dominated by accusation and speculation. It reminded both sides, prosecution and defense, media and public, that justice isn't measured solely by verdicts. It is also about the process itself, the patience it demands, and the understanding it requires. In a world that moves at the speed of outrage, her letter asked for something slower, more deliberate: reflection. For months, the story of Tyler Robinson had unfolded in fragments. Each retelling came from a different angle, prosecutors building a narrative of intent, journalists searching for the next headline, and strangers online weaving their own interpretations. Every voice added a piece, but none offered a whole. The story became less about a person and more about a symbol, an example of something larger: crime, justice, failure, or consequence. Then came his mother's letter. It didn't deny the facts, nor did it attempt to rewrite the story. Instead, it added what had been missing all along: humanity. Her words didn't excuse what had happened, nor did they seek pity. She wasn't asking the world to absolve her son. She was asking it to see him. That distinction changed everything. Through her letter, she reminded the public that behind every headline there are people, flawed, frightened, sometimes broken, who are still capable of feeling, regretting, and hoping. She spoke not as a defense witness, but as a mother who had spent sleepless nights asking herself the same questions the nation was asking, only with far more pain. Her letter gave shape to something universal, the desperate wish to be understood, even when understanding doesn't equal forgiveness. What this case ultimately reveals goes far beyond one family or one tragedy. It reflects something deeply rooted in modern America, the tension between truth and perception, justice and judgment, compassion and outrage. We live in a time when stories spread faster than facts, when emotions often replace evidence, and when public opinion can become a verdict of its own. The Tyler Robinson trial became a microcosm of that struggle, a reminder of how easily narratives can form and how hard it is to unmake them once they take hold. Her letter forced many to pause and reconsider. It asked uncomfortable questions. How do we, as a society, balance accountability with empathy? How do we allow justice to function without letting rage consume it? And how do we make space for grace, not as an escape from responsibility, but as part of what responsibility means? For the families at the center of this case, pain remains a constant, though it takes different forms. One family mourns a loss that can never be undone: the empty chair at dinner, the photographs that will never be updated, the future that stopped too soon. The other family lives under a different kind of shadow, one of uncertainty and guilt, wondering whether the world will ever see their loved one as more than the worst moment of his life. Both families are trapped within the same story, shaped by forces far beyond their control. The courtroom, for all its structure and rules, cannot contain the complexity of their grief. While lawyers argue and witnesses testify, life outside continues. Neighbors whisper, social media speculates, and the weight of public judgment grows heavier each day. The mother's voice, once silenced by fear and shame, now echoes as a quiet challenge to the rest of the nation. Her words do not erase the evidence or the suffering, they coexist with them. They remind us that justice, at its best, is not blind in the sense of indifference, but impartial in its ability to listen. It must hear as much as it judges. It must make room for truth and compassion to walk side by side, for one without the other leaves the human spirit fractured. In her closing lines, she didn't speak of winning or losing. She spoke of healing, of a slow, uncertain path toward understanding that could exist even in the aftermath of tragedy. That kind of courage, the courage to speak from the heart in a world that rewards silence, became the most unexpected act of defiance. As the trial continues, the outcome remains uncertain. The jury will decide what the law demands, but outside the courtroom, the court of public opinion has already shifted. People are beginning to question not just what happened, but how they've chosen to see it. The case has transcended its setting. It's no longer confined to a courthouse in Utah. It has become a mirror reflecting something far larger: how we, as a society, respond to tragedy, how quickly we assign blame, and how deeply we struggle to separate fact from feeling. When the cameras eventually turn away and the headlines fade, what will remain are the people who must live with what's left behind. The unanswered questions, the late-night regrets, the silent prayers whispered into the dark, the private grief that lingers long after the public attention has moved on. And perhaps, somewhere within all of that pain, the fragile hope that understanding will one day follow judgment. Her letter lingers, not as a plea, but as a reminder. It asks us to reconsider what justice truly means. Is it a verdict handed down from the bench? Or is it something broader, a collective willingness to listen before deciding, to see people before defining them, to understand that accountability without compassion risks turning justice into vengeance? In a world saturated with noise, where outrage is currency and silence feels like surrender, her words stood apart. They didn't shout. They didn't demand. They waited quietly for the world to listen. Because sometimes, truth doesn't arrive in the courtroom's final gavel or in the breaking news headline. Sometimes it comes in the soft, trembling voice of a mother who still believes that, even in pain, understanding is possible. Her letter, now shared across platforms and news cycles, continues to resonate. It has sparked debate, reflection, even discomfort, but that's what truth often does. It unsettles before it heals. It forces us to look at ourselves, not just at those on trial. In the end, the story of Tyler Robinson may be remembered not only for the tragedy that began it, but for the courage of a mother who refused to let her son be reduced to a single act. Her letter doesn't rewrite what happened, but it reshapes how we remember it. And in that small but significant way, it restores something that had been lost, not innocence but empathy. Because sometimes the greatest act of justice isn't found in the courtroom at all. It's found in the willingness to listen. If you believe every voice deserves to be heard, remember the story, and subscribe for more that reveal the human side of truth.